We were halfway through dinner when my father set his fork down, leaned back in his chair, and said it like a fact, not an insult. "She's a burden. Always has been. Only good at making mistakes." His voice didn't rise. He didn't look angry. Just tired, like he'd waited years to say it out loud. Across the table, my mother folded her napkin in her lap. She didn't even look at me when she added, "And her kid? He's just a mini failure. Runs in the family, I guess." The room was quiet. The only sound was the clink of silverware on porcelain. My chest felt tight, but I stayed still. I didn't defend myself. I didn't speak. Not because I agreed with them, but because it wasn't the first time. I'd heard worse. I glanced at my 7-year-old son, Leo. He was sitting beside me, legs swinging beneath the chair, a piece of chicken half chewed on his plate. His shoulders had tensed. He looked down. His eyes didn't move. Then slowly, Leo put his fork down. He didn't ask if he could be excused. He didn't look to me for reassurance. He turned his head toward my father, his grandfather, and spoke so clearly, I remember the way the room seemed to shrink around his words. "Grandpa," he said, "I read the letter you hid in Mom's old diary." My father didn't blink. My mother's hand froze in midair. I felt my heart stop. Leo kept going. "You said you never wanted her to keep me, that you told her to leave me behind." And just like that, my father never spoke again. Not to Leo, not to me, not to anyone. I didn't want to go to the dinner. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror that afternoon, brushing my hair with one hand and holding Leo's lunchbox in the other. He sat on the floor by the tub, trying to wrestle a sock onto his foot. "Do I have to call Grandpa sir again?" he asked without looking up. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Only if you want to confuse him." The truth was, I hadn't seen my parents in almost 5 months. They hadn't visited, they hadn't called, and I hadn't wanted them to. But 2 weeks ago, my mom left a voicemail saying they were hosting a family dinner and that it would mean a lot if Leo and I came. She said it like she was offering us something generous, like she hadn't once told me I was a disgrace. I didn't want to go, but Leo asked if there would be dessert, so I said yes. I packed him into the car, dressed in his best corduroy pants and a tiny navy sweater. I wore a black blouse that still had a price tag tucked under the seam because I'd never had a reason to wear it before. I told myself it was just dinner, one night, a few hours. I could survive anything for Leo. As I drove through our neighborhood, Leo looked out the window and started listing dinosaurs in alphabetical order. He was proud he'd memorized that from a book his teacher gave him. I half listened, nodding, answering his quiz questions while gripping the steering wheel tighter than I needed to. By the time we reached my parents' house, the same one I grew up in, I could feel that old heavy ache settle into my chest. The front yard was manicured to perfection. The porch was swept clean. Every window glared with polished glass. Inside, nothing had changed. My father still kept his military plaques in a neat line above the fireplace. My mother's china cabinet still had its corners dusted weekly. The living room smelled like lemon polish and something sharp underneath, something colder. Walter and Meryl weren't bad people, not in the way you hear on the news. They never hit me. They never screamed. But they had a way of breaking things without raising their voices. They chipped away at me slowly, with disapproval served in teaspoons. When I got pregnant at 28 after a messy breakup with a man who didn't want the word dad attached to his name, my parents told me I was reckless, irresponsible, ungrateful. "You already disappoint us enough," my father said. My mother added, "You think this baby's going to fix you?" But Leo was never meant to fix me. He was the only thing that ever made sense. When I looked at him for the first time, I knew I didn't need their permission to feel proud of who I was. But being a single mom wasn't easy, and sometimes, even when I was holding it together, I still heard their voices in my head. We entered the dining room with the good plates. My father stood at the head of the table like a man preparing to give orders. His smile was thin. My mother hugged me with the stiffness of a polite neighbor. Leo climbed into his chair. I helped him tuck his napkin into his lap. He looked so small at that big table, surrounded by a family that had never made room for either of us. Dinner started off polite. My parents asked about my job at the clinic, more like checked off a box. My mom complimented Leo's posture. My dad asked him if he played sports. When Leo said he liked drawing more, my father made a small grunt and said, "That's interesting." I focused on breathing evenly. I cut Leo's chicken. I reminded him to say thank you. I answered questions in short, safe sentences. But beneath the surface, I could feel it coming. The shift. That moment when civility curdles into contempt. It always came eventually. And when it did, I would be ready. Or at least I thought I would. Because no matter how many times they made me feel like I was failing, I had never let them touch Leo. I had protected him from all of it. Until that night. Until the moment my father opened his mouth and said what he really thought of me. Until my mother joined in like she'd been waiting for an invitation. And until Leo, my quiet, thoughtful little boy, put down his fork and said the one thing that none of us were ready to hear. Dinner was beef roast, green beans with almonds, and mashed potatoes piped onto the plates like it was a holiday. My mother had folded the napkins into stiff triangles. The table sparkled. It was all for show. Walter sat at the head, carving the meat with slow precision. He passed the slices out like communion. When he spoke, he didn't look at me. He looked past me, through me. "So, still working that little job at the clinic?" I nodded. "Yes, I'm a patient coordinator now." He raised an eyebrow. "Meaning you answer phones in scrubs." Before I could reply, Meryl jumped in. Celine's always had a way with words, just not with direction. Leo pushed a bean across his plate. I reached under the table and squeezed his knee gently. He didn't look up. "I like my job," I said, keeping my tone even. "I help people every day." My father chuckled softly. "Right. Saving the world one clipboard at a time?" It had always been like this, their sarcasm dressed as conversation, a casual dismantling of anything I built for myself. At 15, they told me I was too dramatic. At 20, they told me I lacked drive. At 28, when I told them I was pregnant and keeping the baby, they said I had finally ruined my life for good. Now I could feel the old rhythm returning, the double-edged compliments, the long pauses where I was supposed to feel grateful for their judgment. Meryl turned to Leo. "Do you like school, sweetie?" Leo nodded. "I like art best." She tilted her head. "No sports?" "I like drawing superheroes," he said. Walter reached for his wine. "Figures. The artsy types are always the ones who can't handle real work." The words landed with a thud. I tried to smile for Leo's sake, but something in him had changed. He was quiet now, tense. Walter sliced another piece of roast. "I just think boys should be pushed more. Celine always needed a shove." Meryl didn't disagree. She was always sensitive. We hoped motherhood might toughen her up. There was no yelling, no shouting, just knives disguised as conversation. Then it happened. Walter set his fork down, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and looked straight at me for the first time that night. "She's a burden," he said, "always has been, only good at making mistakes." His voice was calm. His words were deliberate. He wasn't angry. He was certain. I stared at him, not blinking. I didn't say anything. My chest burned, but my hands stayed still in my lap. Meryl folded her napkin again like it was the most important thing in the room. "And her kid?" she said, not even glancing at Leo. "He's just a mini-failure. Runs in the family, I guess." I looked at Leo. His face didn't change. His eyes stayed on his plate, but his fork lowered. He placed it gently beside his dish and turned to my father. "Grandpa," he said, his voice steady, "I read the letter you hid in Mom's old diary." The room froze. Meryl's head turned. Walter blinked once, then didn't move. Leo looked directly at him. "You said you never wanted her to keep me, that she should have just left me behind." My stomach dropped. I didn't understand what he was saying. I had forgotten about the old diary, shoved in a box in the attic, untouched since before Leo was born. "What letter?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Leo didn't look at me. His eyes stayed locked on his grandfather. "It was behind the back cover," he said. "You wrote that you told Mom she'd ruin her life if she had me, that you didn't want to be part of it. You said you hoped she'd disappear." Walter didn't answer. He didn't ask what Leo was talking about. He didn't deny a word of it. He sat there, mouth slightly open, completely still. My mother dropped her napkin. Her hands trembled as she tried to pick it up. No one said a word. The roast cooled on the plates, the candles kept burning, and the silence settled in like dust. For the first time in my life, I saw it. The fear behind Walter's eyes, the shame, the silence he couldn't climb out of, and my son, only 7 years old, had been the one to break the spell. I stared at my son, heart pounding, my mind racing to catch up with his words. The letter, the diary. I hadn't thought about it in years. It had been mine when I was younger, lined pages full of scrawled anger and dreams I never spoke aloud. After Leo was born, I boxed it away. I didn't remember ever finding a letter inside, and certainly not one from my father. But Leo had found it, and he had read it. Walter sat motionless. His hand hovered over his wine glass, but didn't move. He looked like someone had pulled the world out from under him. "What letter?" I asked again, this time to no one in particular. Leo turned toward me now, hesitant but clear. "Last week, I was looking for the flashlight in the attic. I found your diary in a box. It had your name on the front." I nodded slowly. "Okay." There was an envelope stuck behind the back cover. It had Grandpa's name on it. I opened it. I thought it was old and maybe important. My mother leaned forward, her voice small and sharp. "That's not his letter. He never—" Leo didn't flinch. He looked at her directly. "It had his handwriting, the same as the birthday card from last year." Walter didn't correct him. Meryl's mouth opened to protest, but nothing came out. Leo continued. "It said he told you not to keep me, that he said you'd ruin your life, that he wanted you to leave me behind." My whole body went cold. Something inside me cracked, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't grief or embarrassment, it was clarity, like finally seeing a storm from the outside instead of standing in the middle of it. "I didn't know," I said quietly, looking at my father. "I never saw that letter." Walter's lips parted slightly. He looked like he wanted to speak, but he didn't. And I realized in that moment that he wasn't just shocked he'd been exposed. He was stunned that a child had taken away his power. Leo turned to me again. "I didn't mean to get anyone in trouble." I reached out and took his hand. "You didn't. You told the truth." My mother cleared her throat. "We were trying to help you back then. You were making reckless decisions. We didn't know what else to do." I turned to her, calm but unwavering. "Trying to control someone isn't help. Telling your daughter she's a mistake and her child is a failure isn't love. It's cruelty dressed as concern." Walter still hadn't spoken. He sat there as if every word Leo had said had cemented him in place. Leo looked up at me, eyes wide. "Did you keep me even when Grandpa told you not to?" I smiled, and this time it was real. "Yes," without a second thought. He nodded slowly, as if fitting the last piece of a puzzle into place, and that's when I knew what had to happen next. I stood. I lifted my napkin off my lap and placed it gently on the table. I looked across the room at the family I had tried so hard to make peace with. "To both of you," I said, "thank you for the dinner. But we won't be coming back." Meryl's jaw tightened. "Celine, be reasonable." "For 7 years," I replied, "I've been reasonable. I've explained. I've forgiven. I've let my son believe this was a safe place. But I won't sit here and let him think this kind of silence is normal." Walter finally moved. He blinked once, eyes on me, but still said nothing. Leo stood beside me. He reached for my hand. We walked to the front door without another word. I opened it, held it for Leo, and we stepped out into the night. The air was cool and quiet. As we reached the car, Leo looked up. "Are you mad at me for reading it?" "No," I said, buckling him in. "I'm proud of you for telling the truth." He nodded, then looked out the window. "Grandpa didn't say anything." "No," I said, starting the engine. "He didn't." And deep down, I knew he wouldn't. Not now. Not ever again. Because when the truth comes from the person you underestimated most, there's nowhere left to hide. The drive home was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that used to follow family dinners. It wasn't heavy or cold. It was peaceful. Leo stared out the window as street lights passed over his face like soft spotlights. He looked thoughtful, but not afraid. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, half expecting tears, but he was calm. His small shoulders weren't tense anymore. I wasn't used to that. Back at the apartment, I tucked him into bed like always. He asked for 2 stories instead of 1. I read both, then kissed his forehead and turned out the light. As I stood to leave, he whispered, "He never said sorry." I turned back toward him. "I don't think he knows how." "Why not?" he asked. I sat on the edge of his bed. Some people spend their whole lives pretending they don't make mistakes. Saying sorry would mean they'd have to admit they were wrong. That's scary for some people. Leo thought about that for a while. Then he nodded and pulled the blanket up under his chin. "He looked scared tonight," he said. He was right. Walter hadn't shouted. He hadn't denied anything. He hadn't thrown his usual insults or tried to deflect. He had gone completely still, like a man stripped of every mask he'd ever worn. He looked like someone who had built his entire identity around being right and suddenly had no idea who he was when the truth stood in front of him. That night, after Leo fell asleep, I went to the attic. I found the box exactly where he said. The diary was wrapped in an old scarf from my college days. When I opened it, there it was, wedged in the back cover. A yellowed envelope with Walter's name written in blocky handwriting. I pulled out the paper. It was short, 1 paragraph, not signed. "If she goes through with this, she'll ruin everything. We gave her chances. She kept failing. This baby will be her final mistake. I can't stop her, but I won't support it. I won't be part of that life." I stared at the page for a long time. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It felt more like proof of something I had always sensed, but never had the words for. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then I lit a match in the kitchen sink and watched the paper turn to ash. I wasn't keeping it as a reminder. I didn't need it anymore. 2 weeks passed before I got a letter in the mail. It wasn't from Walter. It was from my mother. A single sheet of paper, handwritten. "You embarrassed your father. You shouldn't have let Leo read that. Children should not be involved in adult matters. This is exactly what we meant when we said you weren't fit to raise a child. We will not be reaching out again." I read it once and set it down. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rejected. I felt free. The next morning, Leo came into the kitchen while I was pouring coffee. "Do we have to see them again?" "No," I said. "We don't." He nodded. "Good, they weren't nice." He pulled a sheet of paper from his backpack. It was a drawing, a superhero in a red cape with a heart on his chest, holding the hand of a woman with curly hair and a big smile. I smiled. "Who's that?" "It's me," he said. "And you. I made you strong. You broke the dragon's fire." I hung the drawing on the fridge. Walter never called. Not once. And he never answered the message I sent to confirm we wouldn't be attending another dinner. He didn't speak to us again. But I realized something important. He didn't need to. That silence he chose, it was his own punishment. Not because I needed him to feel guilty, but because he had to finally sit with the truth. The kind that couldn't be dismissed with a sarcastic remark or silenced with judgment. Leo spoke it, and once he did, everything changed. Not just for Walter, for me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. And that was the most powerful silence of all. 1 year later, our lives looked different. Not because something dramatic had happened, but because of everything that didn't. There were no more invitations, no more phone calls, no birthday cards slipped into envelopes with clipped, impersonal notes. My parents had cut us off, but this time, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like peace. Leo and I had moved across town to a smaller, brighter apartment closer to his school. The windows overlooked a park where he rode his scooter after class. On Saturdays, he helped me pick out fruit at the farmer's market. Our life was quiet but full. I'd started working full-time at the clinic. They promoted me after I helped coordinate a patient resource program that cut wait times in half. I never told my parents. I didn't need to. I stopped measuring my worth in things they would never see. One afternoon, I picked Leo up from school. His teacher, Miss Everett, stopped me outside the classroom. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "Leo wrote an essay about his hero. He picked you." I stood there, stunned. "Really?" She smiled. "He wrote that you're brave, and that sometimes being brave means saying nothing when people expect you to fight, that you taught him how to be kind and strong without becoming mean." I thanked her and walked Leo to the car. He hummed as we drove. "I didn't bring up the essay. I didn't need to. He had said it all in the way he leaned back in the seat with contentment, like home was wherever we were together. Later that evening, he sat at the kitchen table drawing again. This time, it was a comic strip. I looked over his shoulder. A small boy with a paper sword stood between his mom and a dragon. The dragon breathed fire made of words. Burden. Mistake. Failure. But the boy wasn't afraid. He held up a mirror and the dragon stopped breathing fire. Why a mirror? I asked. Leo shrugged. Because sometimes people say mean things to hide from themselves. But if they have to look at what they really said, they can't hide anymore. I leaned down and kissed the top of his head. He went back to drawing and I stood in the kitchen, staring at the little red heart he had drawn on the mom's shirt. That was when it truly landed. I had spent so many years trying to earn love from people who only understood control. I bent to fit their expectations. I shrank to stay in their orbit. I took their silence as a judgment instead of the gift it could become. But now I knew better. Walter's silence wasn't power. It was emptiness. He had nothing left to say, not because he had won, but because he finally saw the cost of the words he had chosen over decades. The man who once controlled every room with a glance had been undone by a child who simply spoke the truth. And that child, my son, was growing into someone who would never need to shout to be heard. Sometimes I wondered if Walter ever thought about what happened that night, if he remembered Leo's voice, if he regretted the letter or the silence that followed. I would never know. And that was the point. I no longer needed answers. I no longer waited for closure. I had created my own. The day after Leo's birthday, we planted a tree in the yard behind our building. It was his idea. Trees don't talk, he said, but they grow. As we packed the soil around the roots, I asked what kind of tree he wanted it to be. A truth tree, he said, so it always stands tall even when people say the wrong things. That evening, I looked at the tree from the kitchen window. It was small, barely taller than Leo, but sturdy. The wind moved its leaves, but it held firm. That's what we were now. Not loud, not flashy, but rooted in something real. The night Walter called me a burden, I had stayed quiet. Not because I was weak, but because I knew my worth didn't depend on his words. Leo showed me that the truth doesn't always need to roar. Sometimes it just needs to be said once, clearly in the presence of someone who needed to hear it. And when it is, everything changes. We don't speak to my father anymore. But that silence is finally mine. Some stories aren't about revenge or redemption. Some are about reclaiming the parts of ourselves that were never broken to begin with. I used to think silence meant weakness, that staying quiet made me small. But I understand now that silence, when chosen on your own terms, is a kind of strength. My father never spoke again, and I never needed him to. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to stand in the quiet and choose yourself anyway, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. Your story matters too. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories that speak the truth we sometimes struggle to say out loud. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story. My husband died in a car accident on a rainy Thursday morning. At the funeral, while I was still clutching my son's hand and trying to remember how to breathe, my father leaned in and said, "You should have married someone smarter." Then he turned and walked away. They didn't call, not once. Not for me, not for Micah. 2 months passed. Then, one evening, my phone lit up. My mother's name. A message. "We'd love to stop by. We miss you. We'll bring tea." I knew they found out. They'd learned what Caleb left behind, his portfolio, his will, everything. So I said yes. And when they arrived, smiling at my front door, my 8-year-old son handed them a gift bag. Inside was a printed copy of the will, and on top of it, a sticky note in my handwriting. "We know why you're here." My name is Amelia Dane. I'm 34, a mother, a widow, and I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside Annapolis, Maryland. It's the kind of place where people wave from their porches and mow their lawns every Saturday. The houses all look the same, but inside mine, everything changed on September 14th. It was a Thursday. It had been raining hard that morning. the kind of rain that makes traffic a nightmare. Caleb left early for work. He kissed Micah's forehead while he was still half asleep, gave me a quick hug in the kitchen, and grabbed the protein bar I always packed in his bag. I still remember the way he smiled as he walked out. Calm, focused. He was always like that, steady no matter what. By noon, he was gone. A semi-truck lost control on a slick highway ramp. Caleb's car was crushed. The officer told me it was quick. He didn't suffer. I nodded as if that made any part of it easier to carry. In the days after, everything blurred. I answered questions. I picked out a casket. I tried to explain death to an 8-year-old who thought his dad would be home in time to watch cartoons. Micah asked if we could leave the porch light on for him, just in case he got lost. People came and went. Neighbors dropped off casseroles. Friends texted prayers. But my parents, my own parents, barely looked at me during the service. My father, Gordon West, is a retired engineer. He's sharp, methodical, and proud of it. My mother, Lillian, follows his lead in everything. When Gordon speaks, she nods. When he disapproves, so does she. Gordon never liked Caleb. He once called him a gentle failure. He thought Caleb was too soft, too quiet, not ambitious enough. Caleb didn't dress like a man chasing status. He didn't brag. He invested, saved, built our future quietly. But my father didn't see that. He wanted loud success. Titles, suits, handshakes, ego. At the funeral, I stood by Caleb's casket with Micah holding my hand. My father walked up, leaned in, and said the words I'll never forget. "You should have married someone smarter." I didn't respond. I couldn't. He walked away before I had the chance. My mother followed him. They didn't say another word. They left before we even got home. In the weeks that followed, the silence from them became louder than grief. No calls, no visits, not even a card for Micah's birthday, which was just 3 weeks after the funeral. I was navigating single motherhood, trauma, estate paperwork, and sleepless nights, completely alone. Micah never asked where they were. He just stopped mentioning them. I think he felt their absence before I could explain it. The house felt empty. Caleb's scent still lingered on his favorite sweatshirt hanging over the kitchen chair. His laptop was left open on our desk, the last email he never got to send frozen on the screen. At night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, wondering how I'd raise our son alone. Then one day, I found something. I was sorting through the bedroom closet, trying to make space, when I opened a small, fireproof box Caleb kept locked. Inside were folders, papers, neatly labeled statements, his investment portfolio. I knew he was good with money, but I had no idea. There were shares in multiple tech startups, index funds, real estate holdings, and over $2.4 million spread across accounts I never knew existed. He'd built it slowly, consistently, and quietly. Caleb never talked about money like a prize. It was security. It was love in spreadsheets and planning. There was also a copy of his will. Everything, every share, every cent, every piece of real estate was left to me and Micah. I sat on the edge of the bed holding those documents, stunned. Not because I felt rich, because I felt something else. Seen. Protected. Caleb had planned for this. Somehow, he knew he needed to take care of us even in death. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do yet. I wasn't ready to share any part of him, not even the legacy he left behind. 2 days later, I got the text from my mother. "Hi, honey. We've been thinking of you and Micah. Can we stop by tomorrow? We'll bring tea." They didn't ask how I was. They didn't say sorry. They just wanted to come over. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the screen for almost an hour. I read the message again and again. I wasn't confused. I was certain. They had found out. Someone told them. Maybe one of Caleb's former co-workers. Maybe they saw something online, but the timing was too precise. They weren't reaching out because they missed us. They were coming for what Caleb left behind, and I was ready. When my parents messaged me, I didn't reply right away. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even angry. I was calm. Too calm. There's a kind of stillness that comes when your expectations die before the relationship does. I had already buried the version of them that I used to hope for, the warm, dependable parents I thought might someday show up for me. But now they wanted tea and a visit. After 2 months of silence, 2 months of no, how are you? No, can we help with Micah? Not even a passing message when the death announcement ran in the local paper with Caleb's full name and photo. Now suddenly they were interested. I showed the text to Micah. He was sitting on the living room rug, building something with his Legos. "They want to come over tomorrow," I said. "What do you think?" He looked up from his little tower. "Why?" That was the right question. I sat next to him. "I think they heard about the money, about what Daddy left us." Micah squinted, thinking. "So they're coming to get it?" "Maybe not to take it," I said, "but definitely to be close to it." He nodded. "Are you going to let them in?" I hesitated, then said, "Yes. But not because I owe them anything, because I want them to know that I see them clearly now." That night, after Micah went to bed, I pulled out the documents Caleb left behind. His will, the trust paperwork, account statements. I flipped through the pages, not because I needed to reread them, but because I wanted to remember the man who had quietly built this safety net while being ridiculed for not having enough ambition. Caleb never argued with my father. He never raised his voice or defended himself when Gordon mocked his career. Once, when I told him he didn't have to keep putting up with it, he said, "I'm not here to impress your dad. I'm here to protect you and Micah. That's all that matters." He meant it. The next morning, I made a plan. I printed a fresh copy of the will. I took a sticky note and wrote on it in black marker, "We know why you're here." I folded the paper neatly and placed it in a gift bag we had left over from Micah's birthday. It had a bright red ribbon on top, the kind that made it look like something joyful lived inside. When Micah came downstairs, I handed him the bag. "This is for Grandma and Grandpa," I said. "When they get here, you'll give it to them, okay?" He looked inside and read the note. He didn't laugh. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and said, "Should I smile when I give it to them?" "You decide," I said. At 4:45 p.m., I started tidying the living room. Not to impress them. I just wanted control. The floors were clean, the couch was fluffed. Caleb's photo sat quietly on the mantel, watching everything. I lit one candle on the coffee table. Lemon and cedarwood. It smelled like something alive. At exactly 5:05 p.m., the doorbell rang. Micah looked at me. I nodded. He walked to the door, opened it, and there they were. My mother wore pearls and lipstick. My father had on a navy sweater, the one he used to wear when he wanted to look approachable. They smiled like it was Thanksgiving. "We brought tea," Lillian said, holding up a paper bag with handles. "Your favorite." Chamomile Micah said nothing. He simply held out the gift bag. My father took it. "What's this?" Micah shrugged. "It's from Mom. She said you'd understand." They stepped inside. I stood behind the hallway wall, watching. I didn't rush out. I wanted them to read it first. My father pulled out the papers, unfolded them. His face twitched slightly when he reached the sticky note. "Is this a copy of Caleb's will?" my mother asked, her voice uncertain. My father read the note aloud. "We know why you're here." Their smiles faded. My mother looked at the floor. My father's jaw tightened. I walked into the room, slow and steady. "You didn't come when he died. You didn't check on your grandson. You waited until there was something to gain. I wanted you to have this copy, so there's no confusion about who Caleb left everything to. I also wanted you to see the note, so there's no confusion about what this is." Lillian opened her mouth, then closed it. Gordon looked at me, his expression stony. "I think you should go now," I said. Micah stood beside me, not afraid, not confused, just quiet, watching. Without a word, they turned and left. The tea bag still sat on our kitchen counter, unopened. That night, I poured it down the drain. The house was silent after they left. I didn't cry. I didn't sit down. I stood by the window for a long time, watching their car pull out of the driveway. I wanted to make sure they were really gone before I let my breath go. Micah came up beside me and leaned into my arm. "They didn't even say thank you," he said. "No," I replied. "They didn't." He looked up. "Are they coming back?" "I don't think so," I said. "But if they do, we'll be ready again." He nodded once, then walked back to his Legos like it was just another Tuesday. And in a way, that's what I needed it to be. Ordinary, uncomplicated, the end of something. But I couldn't shake one thought. If they were willing to come here with smiles and tea because of what Caleb left behind, what would they do next? I'd seen what they were capable of, not just their absence, but their calculated return. I needed to be ready for whatever might follow. The next morning, I made calls. I set up a meeting with our lawyer, Emily, a woman Caleb had worked with to draft the estate plan. She had kind eyes, but a spine of steel. I asked her to walk me through every detail of the trust and how to protect it moving forward. Emily explained that everything Caleb left had already been legally transferred to me and Micah. The documents were airtight. My parents had no claim, no standing, and no reason to challenge the will unless they were willing to lie, manipulate, or find someone to do it for them. "What do I do if they come back with questions?" I asked. "You say nothing," she replied. "You're not obligated to explain your life or your finances to people who weren't there when it mattered." That line stayed with me. It settled deep in my chest and felt like armor. That night, I sat on the living room floor with Micah and told him the full truth. "Your dad worked hard to make sure we'd be okay," I said. "He saved, he invested, and he built something to take care of us. He didn't talk about it much, but he did it all for us." Micah listened without interrupting, his little brow furrowed in concentration. "So we have money now?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Enough that we won't have to worry about where we live or what we eat. Enough to choose the kind of life we want." His eyes widened slightly. "Does that mean we can go to the beach?" I laughed, the first real laugh in weeks. "Yes, it means we can go to the beach, and we will." Then I told him something harder. "But it also means that some people might try to be close to us for the wrong reasons. People who weren't here when we needed them, like Grandma and Grandpa." Micah didn't seem surprised. "I don't think they really missed us," he said. "No," I said quietly. "They didn't." The next day, I made another decision. I went into the garage and pulled out a box of Caleb's belongings. Old clothes, tools, tech gear, things I hadn't been able to look at yet. I opened the box slowly, touching each item with care. I found his journal, half filled with notes on startups and business ideas. I found a USB drive labeled "just in case." I plugged it into my laptop. It was a letter, a video recording. Caleb sat in his home office wearing a plain gray t-shirt and looking into the camera with his usual calm. "If you're watching this, something went wrong," he said. "But if it did, I want you to know that I tried to plan for everything. The accounts are secure. The will is final. I chose to leave it all to you and Micah because I trust you to live the life we talked about." He paused. "You don't have to explain anything to anyone, not even your parents, especially not them." I watched the whole video, twice. I saved it, backed it up, and then printed a still image from it and framed it. I placed the frame on Micah's desk, a quiet reminder of who Caleb was and how fiercely he loved. That weekend, I took Micah to the beach. We walked barefoot on the sand, let the waves chase us, and ate ice cream before dinner. We didn't talk about the money or the will. We didn't talk about my parents. We talked about tide pools and seashells and whether or not dolphins sleep with their eyes open. That was the first day that felt like a beginning, not just a reaction to what happened, a choice to move forward. It was 2 weeks after the beach trip when my parents showed up again. No warning, no message, just the sound of tires on gravel and the sharp knock of my father's hand against the front door. I saw them through the window. My mother was holding a plate wrapped in foil. My father stood next to her with that same practiced smile he wore at the funeral, the one that meant nothing. Micah was upstairs doing homework. I opened the door. "Hi, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice a little too bright. "We were just in the neighborhood." My father added, "We brought lemon bars, your favorite." "I didn't tell you to come," I said, blocking the doorway with my body. "We just wanted to talk," my mother replied, glancing toward the living room like she was trying to see if the gift bag was still there. "We feel like things ended awkwardly last time." "They ended honestly," I said. My father's smile dropped. "We're still your family, Amelia, like it or not." "You made that choice when you walked out of the funeral and didn't look back," I said. "You disappeared when I needed you. You didn't even call on Micah's birthday." He stepped forward. I was angry. Grief makes people say things they don't mean. I folded my arms. "You meant every word. You've always thought Caleb was beneath me. Now you see what he left behind, and suddenly you're here with baked goods." They didn't deny it. My mother's hands trembled slightly, the lemon bars starting to sag in the foil. "You're misjudging us," she said, her voice breaking. "We were wrong. We know that now." I stepped aside just enough for them to enter, not because I trusted them, but because I needed them to see what they had lost. On the wall to the right of the entryway, I had hung a new picture. It was a printout from Caleb's final video, him looking into the camera, smiling. Beneath it, I had written in neat script, "Your silence was loud." He filled it with love. They both saw it immediately. My father's eyes narrowed. My mother looked down at the floor. "I want you to listen to something," I said, walking over to the coffee table. I grabbed the USB drive and plugged it into the TV. The screen flickered on and Caleb's face appeared. He looked alive, steady, comforting. He spoke in that calm, even voice. "If you're watching this, something happened to me. I'm sorry. I hate the idea of leaving you alone, but I want you to know I thought about everything. I planned as best I could." My mother gasped. My father didn't move. "I left everything to you and Micah," Caleb continued. "Not because I didn't trust anyone else, but because I didn't need to. You're enough. You always have been." I paused the video there. Silence settled in the room like dust. My parents looked at me, but I didn't flinch. "I let you in today so you could see who he was," I said. "So you could hear it from him. Not for your guilt, not for your comfort, and not because I need anything from you. I wanted you to see the kind of man you dismissed, the man you said wasn't smart enough, the man who built a future while you stood on the sidelines and judged." My father tried to speak, but I raised a hand. "You don't get to rewrite the story. You made your choices. You don't get to pretend they never happened just because they're inconvenient now." He swallowed hard and looked toward the door. "We should go." "Yes," I said. "You should." They walked out without another word. I stood at the door until their car turned off our street. Later that night, Micah asked why they had come again. "They came to see what they could take," I said. "They left with nothing because there was nothing left for them." He thought about that, then nodded. "Daddy gave it all to us." "Yes," I said. "Every part that mattered." I sat beside him on the couch, and together we watched the rest of Caleb's video. Not because we needed to hear it again, but because we wanted to feel it again, to remember the love that came wrapped in planning, in foresight, in sacrifice. That moment was the closure I didn't know I needed. Not just the end of their involvement in our lives, but the beginning of something new. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was choosing. After that day, my parents never came back. They didn't call. They didn't send another message. They faded in the same way they had before, except this time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt relieved. Their silence no longer felt like punishment. It felt like peace. Micah asked fewer questions as the days passed. He started sleeping better. He hummed while brushing his teeth and ran through the house with the kind of ease kids should have. I watched him return to himself, little by little. His joy wasn't loud, but it was steady, like Caleb's had been. I donated most of the things my parents brought that day. I kept the lemon bars sealed until the expiration date and tossed them quietly into the trash, not out of spite. I just didn't want anything in our kitchen that had come from manipulation wrapped in powdered sugar. One morning, while packing Micah's lunch, I looked around the kitchen and realized I hadn't cried in weeks. That surprised me. Not because I thought I'd be over the grief, but because the grief had changed shape. It wasn't heavy like it had been. It moved differently. It taught me how to stand taller. Caleb's voice still echoed in the house sometimes, in the small things, the password on the Wi-Fi that only he would have chosen, the funny labels on our spice jars he made just to make me laugh. I didn't erase those things. I never will. They remind me that love can exist in the smallest, most practical acts. I used part of Caleb's portfolio to set up a fund for Micah. College, healthcare, anything he'll need in the future. I kept the rest invested the way Caleb would have wanted, steady, strategic, long-term. I took a few thousand and booked us a trip to Yellowstone. Micah wants to see bison in real life. I told him we'll get as close as the park rangers allow. The night before the trip, we packed our bags together. Micah was excited about his binoculars and a notebook he wanted to use to draw animals. As we zipped up his bag, he turned to me and asked, "Are we going to be okay forever?" I didn't pause. "Yes, we are." Not because of the money, not because the house is paid off or because the numbers on a screen are high enough to make my parents reappear. We're going to be okay because I learned how to protect us, even after the one person who always did was gone. Caleb didn't just leave us assets, he left us clarity. He showed me how to prepare, how to choose peace over performance, and how to stop making space for people who only show up when there's something to gain. I used to crave my parents' approval. I bent myself to fit their expectations and twisted myself in conversations trying to earn some version of their pride. I spent years thinking that if I worked hard enough, stayed polite enough, or succeeded just right, they would see me. But I see myself now. That's enough. Micah doesn't need to inherit trauma disguised as tradition. He doesn't need to grow up learning how to shrink himself for family. He needs to know what love looks like when it's real, what it sounds like when someone shows up without being asked, what it feels like to be chosen without condition. That's the legacy Caleb left, and this is the life we're building from it. To anyone watching this who's felt abandoned in the middle of grief, who's watched people walk away when you needed them most, I want to say this. You don't owe anyone access to your healing. You don't have to let someone back in just because they show up smiling. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to move forward without dragging the weight of other people's disappointment behind you. Grief changes you. It strips you down, but it also shows you what's real. It showed me my son's strength, my husband's quiet brilliance, and my own ability to choose something better. Not just survival, not just getting by, but a life built with purpose, clarity, and love. And we're just getting started. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own strength, your own loss, or your own journey back to peace, I hope you'll share it. Someone out there might need to hear that they're not alone. Leave a comment, tell me your story. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, real ones, raw ones, the kind no one talks about but everyone feels, subscribe to the channel. I have more to tell. Thank you for being here. We're stronger than we think, and we're never really alone when we speak our truth.